On today's World Insight with Tian Wei.
We pay far too much, and they pay far too little.
U.S. President Donald Trump attends the NATO summit after bashing European allies for skimping on defense spending. What is going to be the future like for that alliance? And our exclusive interview with health guru and celebrity doctor, Dr. Oz, as he explains how the magic bullet cures may be hiding in the ancient medical tradition. Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program comes to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. The NATO summit in Belgium is currently underway, but this meeting is shrouded by a new sense of uncertainty, with U.S. President Donald Trump having repeatedly criticized the NATO for its alleged one-sided benefits. European leaders fear the retreat of U.S. involvement. In fact, the summit is coming just days before Donald Trump's planned meeting with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin. So what will this summit hold for the future of this organization and of this alliance? Let's take a look.
The two-day summit kicked off with gestures of harmony and a display of military might. It would not last long. Donald Trump was quick to bring up an old gripe, urging NATO allies once again to commit to spending the equivalent of 4% of GDP on defense, double the current target.
Many countries owe us a tremendous amount of money from many years back, where they're delinquent, as far as I'm concerned, because the United States has had to pay for them.
According to latest NATO estimates, the U.S. spends up to 3.6% of GDP on defense, which pays for nearly 70% of NATO's bills. Among the organization's 29 members, only the U.S., the U.K., Estonia and Greece spend more than 2% of their GDP on defense. This year, Poland, Romania, Latvia and Lithuania are expected to reach that benchmark. Other countries find Trump's 4% request too much of a leap from existing target that they must meet by 2024. German Chancellor Angela Merkel and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau have both refused Trump's request, saying they will stick to the current plan of 2%. NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said members should first focus on achieving the more manageable goal.
And that's exactly why all allies agreed that those who are spending less than 2% have to spend more, and that's exactly what we have started to do, because we have turned the corner of the years of cutting defense budgets.
President Trump also made Germany a target at this year's summit, slamming the country as a captive of Russia. He urged the Germans to pour more money into defense, rather than, in his words, making Russia richer.
Germany is totally controlled by Russia, because they were getting from 60 to 70% of their energy from Russia and a new pipeline. And you tell me if that's appropriate, because I think it's not.
And Merkel hit back. We manage our independent policies and make our independent decisions. In the more intimate setting of a bilateral meeting, Trump changed his tone, saying he has a very good relationship with the Chancellor.
For more on the NATO summit, we are joined in Beijing, Mr. Rong Ying, Vice President of China Institute of International Studies. In Washington, D.C., we have John Sitilidis, who is a principal at Trilogy Advisors. Mr. Sitilidis, I want to start with you. What about this time to NATO summit? Will that mend defenses with America's European allies, or actually things are going to downstream even further?
President Trump was elected in 2016 to be a disruptor both on the domestic stage inside the United States and also on the international stage in terms of our relations with our allies and with our adversaries. And with NATO specifically, President Trump has been very clear. This was an alliance founded for very different reasons in its existence today in 1949 until 1991 to prevent the Soviet Union from expanding into Europe. The Soviet Union hasn't existed for nearly 3 decades, and yet NATO continues to exist without a serious revisit as to its existence, its operations, what its purpose is. And I think President Trump's focus will be on 2 key issues. One is, if Russia is no longer the threat that the Soviet Union was, why is the United States stationing tens of thousands of troops in a number of European countries at significant cost to U.S. taxpayers?
Right.
If this is an important issue, why aren't countries such as Germany paying more to protect themselves against a Russian threat? And also, the U.S. taxpayers' protection of Europe has allowed for European countries to develop social welfare systems and trade surpluses that President Trump feels is very unfair against the U.S. system.
Right. Let's ask also Mr. Rong, as an observer from the sideline. Of course, China is not a member of NATO. Rather, NATO do not want to invite China into it. China does not want to have any alliance relationship either. Mr. Rong, how do you see the U.S. role now inside NATO? Do you think it is still going to have an interest strongly in that alliance?
Well, it is a big question. I think if you look at the history of NATO, it has always been, I mean, whenever there are big changes in the region and around the world, try to find a way to redefine itself or revisit its role. I think in general, I think if the history of NATO according to the history of NATO, I think that we always talk about the major mission is to keep the United States in, keep the Germany down, and keep the Soviet or the Russia out. Now the situation is changing. I think the question President Trump is asking is relevant in the sense that whether NATO as a military alliance in the region remains relevant. If it is relevant, what are the missions and what, or to in specific terms, what will be the enemies or threat that would continue to bring the two sides, I mean the United States and Europe, I mean together?
Well, U.S. President Donald Trump has tweeted, as he did earlier many times, about the role of the NATO and how U.S. is spending right here. You could take a look at the screen. Here are some of the concrete words that he said recently in his tweets. But having said that, though, Mr. Stylianides, may I ask you about that? I mean, how shall we understand the U.S.'s significance in the world if it withdraws from NATO or if its proportion of responsibility is diminishing within NATO? How relevant will U.S. be with the others within the NATO organization?
I think it's very difficult to envision a complete U.S. withdrawal from Europe anytime soon. The European continent is of incredible importance to the United States geopolitically, from a trade perspective, and essentially from a shared history perspective. But again, I think the question really is, what are the serious threats to Europe, not only as some countries see it from Russia, but also from countries such as Iran, from the larger movements such as radical Islamist terror in the Middle East and in Northern Africa? And how do the NATO allies work together, both European countries and the United States and Canada, to address these various threats? But there's been no serious dialogue about these new threats and what the responses to those threats should be. And I think really more than anything else, that's what President Trump is looking to do on a strategic level at this summit and beyond.
But you know, this sounds quite controversy to what President Trump has been doing since he came into power, Mr. Stylianides. If you think about it, it is the United States alone recently in its unilateral sanction against Russia, but not the European allies of the United States. So if the United States does not think that Russia is that much of a threat, which is one of the original goals of NATO, why did the United States impose unilaterally further sanctions against Russia just over the past few months? So isn't that a lot of conflict of wording coming from the United States? You just want to save money without shouldering enough responsibility, while still want to make sure that Russia is not going to get close to the Europeans. What do you think, Mr. Stylianides?
I think President Trump understands that on any given day of the year, Russia is one of the most important countries in the world. It occupies 1/8 of the world's landmass. It is, along with the United States, the two countries together are the most heavily nuclear-armed countries in the world. And Russia is able to project power and to cause serious problems as it chooses to in Europe, the Middle East, in Central Asia, and in Northeast Asia, for that matter, along China's borders. So I think President Trump recognizes that even where the U.S. and Russia disagree on a number of issues, it's a very important country look to see how we minimize potential problems that may erupt into crises, and also work to enhance cooperation where we have mutual interests in combating Islamist terror, in dealing with Iran's malign activities in the Middle East, and other areas where they could potentially coexist and cooperate.
So is this really about the overall goal of NATO? Has that shifted? Or is this really about the United States trying to withdraw itself from all the important international and multilateral platforms as they did from WTO, from UNHCR, from TPP, from Iran nuclear deal, from Paris Accord? Mr. Stylianides, once again from you.
No, I think Mr. Trump, as president, has decided to withdraw the United States from those particular agreements or multilateral frameworks that he finds against American interests. The Iran deal primarily, the climate deal, which would be incredibly injurious to the U.S. economy, while other countries are able to enjoy polluting benefits for decades to come. And the Human Rights Council at the United Nations is a preposterous council to begin with. But the U.S. is not only not withdrawing from any part of the world, it intends to be a dominant power in every part of the world where it has been for the last century to try to protect the global commons, advance peace and trade, but to do so in a way that reflects current realities, not the realities of 70 years ago.
All right, but here is something that you said very clearly, American interests. Of course, national interest should always be one of the priorities when we are, national politics and international politics functioning. But, Mr. Rome, the reason why there is an international system that has been existing and functioning since the Second World War is that that system seemed to address the needs of many countries, even though the largest proportion of interest could be shared on different issues varies from countries to countries. It's not like one country will always be the winner of everything. Mr. Rome, can it be possible for the United States to be the winner of everything for every international and multilateral platform? Is that, do you think, the goal of the United States? What does it mean for the others?
That's exactly the question I think we are asking, try to understand the so-called the Trump doctrine, or if there's a doctrine. I think if you look at the international system, I think United States and all the countries in the world, of course China is included, has been working together to build a system. And so I think the questions raised by President Trump that the United States is being taken advantage, or the other countries are taking advantage of the United States at the expenses of the United States, is something I think very disturbing. I think for me or other observers, it is not a question of whether the United States would like to continue to sort of exercise the so-called role of leadership. It's rather is something like it wants to change the term of the leadership. This is, I think, what we call the unilateralism. I think at the end, we are living in a globalized world, and we have to work together to address the global issues together.
Mr. Stylianides, what exactly is the U.S. trying to achieve? The biggest interest for the United States in every platform among all the issues in the world? Is that what the U.S. is trying to achieve? Can they be achieved?
Not at all. Any leader of any government of any country has a primary responsibility to advance that country's interests. Whoever is the President of the United States has an obligation to maximize America's interests. But I think what President Trump is doing differently than other presidents is very openly looking to maximize the leverage that both American economic power and military power afforded to advance as cooperative a system as possible, but in what he considers to be in a more fair and equitable manner. He clearly feels that prior agreements by prior presidents have not treated America fairly, and he comes to this from a very different position. The question is, can he persuade our allies to work cooperatively to advance new mutual interests in the years ahead.
But the thing is, why would the ally go with the United States, isn't it? That is the biggest question. What do they see? Is there any more increase of interest for them as well if they go to so-called the latest America version? If one player, particularly one of the most important players, such as the United States, is receding its influence in NATO, there's likely to be rooms for the other to step up and to step in. Mr. Rong, what do you make of those possibilities as an observer?
I think at this moment I don't see a country, other than the United States, has the capability or willingness to replace or take over the leadership of NATO. While I think as far as I can see, the European countries, even I think Germany, will continue to like to work together with the United States. But the question is, if I'm right, is that always the terms. I think the way President Trump is doing it makes these European allies to worry and frustrated that the United States is looking for something like a protection racket or rent. I think this is the frustration, and this is a concern, because in the end it would undermine for them, they would undermine the credibility and the sustainability of NATO.
All right, but credibility, is that the word too big for President Trump, Mr. Stylianides? Is the United States still looking at the credibility, that word at all?
Well, first I just want to address one comment made by our colleague here. I take exception with the use of the phrase protection racket. The NATO alliance very clearly indicates that each member will pay 2% of its GDP for defense purposes. And the honest truth is only 5 countries have been doing so and 24 have not. And President Trump's point is pretty simple and pretty fair. Your obligation per the treaty is 2%. You're not living up to it. So there's no protection racket or anything along those lines. He's simply asking everyone to do what they agreed to do. And I think it's very important that we keep that in mind as more and more NATO countries have agreed to do so, really because of President Trump's request that that be done over the last year and a half.
Mr. Stylianides, I'm not sure whether Mr. Rong is here to argue on behalf of the members of NATO, because China is not a member of NATO, but rather looking at the concept and the logic of what is going on right now regarding the U.S. policy. Talking about the U.S. policy, Mr. Stylianides, about NATO, you see European countries are also trying to have their mini defense forces these days, of course, with the title of fighting against terrorism and many other challenges they are facing. But do you think that they are drifting away from this organization as a result of U.S. How shall I say, lack of understanding of what their needs should be, and also the U.S. Reluctance to be, boosting its energy into the NATO, this organization itself?
There is zero possibility of the European Union or certain member states forming any type of a supplemental or rivalry military organization. The European Union has been talking about this for decades. And again, most NATO countries in Europe don't even fulfill the 2%. Some of them are putting in less than 1% of GDP. Even if they wanted to, they don't have the capacity, and their voters want social welfare programs. They don't want more money spent on defense and security. So they would have severe problems within their own voting blocs and their own democracies getting support for a separate additional military budget.
Mr. Rong, how important it is, continue to be, shall I say, for European countries to still seek defense help and support coming from the United States, as long as Washington knows that that demand is going to be strong, and therefore Trump will have the confidence in pushing other NATO members to fulfill what he calls their obligations. Mr. Rong.
If the differences between across Atlantic, goes on, I'm as an observer, would be watch with great interest how far NATO will be going. Either as the European would go their own national defense capabilities, which I think my colleague said no, or the United States and European allies working together to redefine their missions, and in the meantime, by having agreement to how to share their burdens. Or in the end, possibly NATO is too old and too obsolete that we need to think about post-NATO sort of security arrangement in, across the Atlantic or under Europe.
I see. When we talk about the NATO, you also see other ways of doing things. For example, Canada, decades ago, refused to join what they called then OAS because they believe it was one of those platforms going against communist countries, and Canada was not necessarily interested in it. So you see, Mr. Stylianides, there are different options that countries could have as a result of very different beliefs. If their visions about the future and reality different from the United States, there could be some cracks of NATO, and there could also be some cracks about what the common so-called defense potential would be among these countries. Mr. Stylianides, what would that mean?
Well, I don't know that there necessarily have to be cracks in the NATO alliance. I mean, Canada made a decision based on its own interests, but it remains one of the most stalwart and active members of the NATO alliance, even as it stayed out of the OAS. You look at, for instance, the presence of al-Qaeda and other radical Islamist groups in northern Africa, and France has taken the initiative to intervene in countries such as Mali and Chad without the NATO alliance involved there. And France and England are also involved in freedom of navigation exercises in the Pacific Ocean outside the NATO alliance. So countries still have the flexibility and the independence to act in what they consider to be their own interests or international objectives, even while the NATO alliance remains very much intact. So there's much flexibility here, and I don't want to give anyone the impression that any potential disagreement means the whole alliance collapses. But as our colleague just stated, I think there is much room for a post-NATO discussion about how the transatlantic alliance works best, and a discussion needs to be had about what the objectives are, what the interests are, and what are the threats and accompanying responses. It doesn't have to be the way that it's been for 70 years.
All right, John Stylianides and Rong Ying, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. And you're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program, I speak to health guru and host of Emmy Award-winning show, Dr. Oz. Today, Dr. Oz finds out if Western science can prove the merits of traditional Chinese medicine. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program comes to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. Our health is crucial to enjoying a fulfilling life. Scientists and doctors around the world are exploring the final frontiers of medicine to help us live longer and hopefully better. Yet traditional Chinese medicine traces its roots back thousands of years, and it is still being practiced today. So how does this ancient form of treatment compare to its modern Western counterparts? And what are the best parts of both systems, and can they be combined together? To ask those questions, I approached Dr. Mehmet Oz, professor of surgery at Columbia University and Emmy-winning host of the show, Dr. Oz. He shares with us his thoughts. Dr. Oz, people say, oh, what exactly is the scientific proof of all the elements being put into the Chinese medicine and also the result of the treatment? People have a lot of questions about that. What do you think?
Chinese literature, which is very different from the literature read by Western physicians like myself, does have reports of, for example, common cold therapies. And much of the experience in traditional Chinese medicine is around treating symptoms, not necessarily worrying about all the other things that are going around about that, but do you feel better after having it? I today had moxibustion. Today. So, which is an Artemis herb, and it looks like a wrap paper, and my neck was stiff from having flown over here, because you fall asleep in the wrong way, it hurts, and I feel better. Now, should I ignore that? I think if one person feels better, and the safety factors are pretty reasonable, you should continue to practice it, which is why I talk about acupuncture and a lot of the herbs. But it's hard to copy that into the West. The way we teach medicine in the West is, here's one medication for one problem, and it gives you one solution. But the body's not like that. The body's an ecosystem, like the city around us that I'm looking at right now. And so if there was only one road through the city, it would be perfect. But there's not one road. So you want to go to the Hutong district. You want to play a little bit in the lake. You want to go to a big skyscraper. And you want a medical system that respects all that. And I think what we're looking forward to in the future is the globalization of medicine. Think about this. This interview, you personally, are seen all over the world. Right? My show is in 100 countries. Likewise, our financial systems are global. But medicine has stayed provincial, very small. And we should have medicine be global as well. You want traditional Chinese medicine with Western medicine together. Why choose?
But you know, Dr. Oz, it's a totally different thinking system. As you said, ecosystem. Chinese ancestors apparently have realized that a long time ago. Of course, they didn't go into the details also about the Western way of thinking, which is having so-called scientific proof. So it's two different ways of thinking about one's body, one's life, as in relationship with the nature. How to emerge these two together, I think that is the challenge.
But the Western mind and the Eastern mind have learned to adapt. This concept of complementarity, which is actually from physics. When Einstein developed particle theory and wave theory, he realized that you could have two mutually exclusive ideas. They could both be true. How can you have particle and wave as the foundation of matter? Well, you can. And in its fashion, you want to have integrative medicine. You want to have traditional Chinese medicine, and you want to have Western medicine. And why can't I choose? If I have an acute problem, I cut my leg. Have someone sew it up. That's a Western approach. If I have arthritis of my knee, why not take advantage of the fact that there are solutions that are outside the norm in Western medicine that seem to help people? If it works for 1.5 billion people here in China, why wouldn't I want to make it accessible to people in Europe, the United States, and all over the world?
But how would you answer those questions, the so-called questions based on scientific proof? Or is it going to be only superficial imitation of what exactly Chinese medicine is about?
The better we get at researching why the body does what it does, the more we'll understand why traditional Chinese medicine works. And I do want to be honest about the reality that not everything is going to be shown to be equally effective. But if you have an herb that works, I can finally, for the first time, understand why a biochemical system allows the immune cells to become more aggressive with or without this herb. Take advantage of it.
You're also working now as a member of the Health Advisory Council for the President of the United States. But people really wonder, where is it on the list of priorities for the current administration in the U.S. when it comes to health?
Well, I do know, without question, that everyone in America values their children. And the primary role of the Presidential Council on Fitness and Nutrition and Sports is to make sure young people get out there and get active. And the other members of the council, many of them are sports figures, people who are notable for being vocal on the need to get out and be active, share my enthusiasm. And I've been working in this area for 15 years. We have a kids foundation that spreads out across the nation.
But you know, Dr. Oz, over the years, even through administrations, first ladies of various generations pay a close attention to this. But some reports suggest that the situation is not necessarily improving. So what's wrong?
The first Presidential Council was created by Dwight Eisenhower in the 50s, and President Kennedy, and on through, and the First Lady Michelle Obama would come on my show all the time to talk about her initiatives with young people in health. And Ivanka Trump has been on the same purpose. And so I've had these conversations. The fact of the matter is, we live in a society where we have made it more difficult for young people to be active. This is true here in China. It's true in the United States.
Why is it more difficult?
We don't build communities that have sidewalks or recreational areas. There are no parks you can go to in many parts of the world. And we just give people soccer balls, let them go kick it around. Even that we haven't been able to do. So you've taken an activity that, when I was young, you'd be told, go outside and play until it gets dark. Now your mother coordinates a play date for you at 3:15 on Wednesday. Well, that's hard for everybody. It's hard for mom. It's hard to coordinate it. It's not a lot of playing.
But society has changed. You have to accept that fact and reality.
Society's changed, but there's no reason why we're not smarter about it. And in the United States, the level of obesity has become a problem more and more, but childhood obesity has flattened. And more importantly, among affluent people, obesity is going down.
Affluent meaning people with what kinds of level of income?
If you're making $100,000 or more, the chance of your having an obesity problem goes down. If you're better educated, it goes down as well.
What does it say? What does that say?
It says that when you learn what to do and you have the resources to pursue that knowledge, plus you probably are a little less stressed because you're not worried about the next day's paycheck, that you can cope with your health. And this is true around the world. The challenge for all of us is to recognize that people without a lot of resources all deserve the chance to be healthy. Listen, I don't argue that we should ever say you have to have equal outcomes. You can't guarantee that everyone will always be healthy at the same amount or have the same amount of money or anything else. But we all deserve a chance to be healthy enough to compete in the game of life. And when we don't let young people be healthy enough to get on the playing field, we're taking away their birthright. Right. They will never be able to score and win because they aren't on the field of life.
I'm sure you have realized this administration is quite a controversial one so far. And therefore, serving on that board means even probably more responsibility than it used to be for the nation, for your country, the United States of America. But at the same time, the U.S. over the years has been demonstrating somewhat its leadership in different fields, including health and research about health. But the question is, will that continue? From your perspective, what is likely to be the case?
The biggest challenge in health is actually not what a president or an administration says, it's what personal responsibility people take. We see that firsthand here in China, where individuals recognize no one's going to do it for you. I think too often in the United States and in other parts of the Western world, people expect the government, their doctors, some administration to take charge of their health, and it's never going to happen. The only way to find true happiness is to do what you can for yourself. The major role of the health system is to catch you if you fall, not to be a crutch and lead you along. In fact, no one really wants to have someone telling them what to do for their health. So let's get back to the fundamental responsibility we all have to have. Part of why I'm here in China and I'm so excited about this is traditional Chinese medicine and the philosophical approach it offers, together with other world cultures, Ayurvedic medicine, medicines from Africa and South America. They give us wisdom and opportunities, but mostly they give us hope, and real hope, that you can take advantage of tools that have existed for centuries to deal with the chronic problems that plague humanity and make all of us healthier. It's one of the ways we can forge a bridge, a relationship. You can fight trade wars, but never fight over health.
Maybe not even trade wars.
I don't think trade wars are worth it either, but at least you can see people and why they might do that. But why would you fight health wars? Take the wisdom that other people may have found. No father wants his children to be sick. No mother wants their parents to be sick. Allow those techniques to work. Healthcare, the financing of it needs to be done for people who need it, but the cultural responsibility needs to be on each of us.
You see, Dr. Oz, over the years, the research has really sped up over the years, and you see people think about a bigger potential of their longevity. You see people think about bigger potential of their youth, and they want to sustain their youth as much as possible. A lot of basic scientific research actually could support that now. The question is whether those research are going to be implemented or not, and whether those are, in a way, interacting with the ethical issues. You see that in stem cell research. You also see that about longevity. So, Dr. Oz, I wondered, for someone who has been working on this field for a long time, what do you make of this controversy or balance in a way?
First off, if you can hear my voice right now, there's a good chance that you'll live to age 120. That's for all listeners out there. And I want to just make this clear.
What is making us living 120? I'm counting on you right now.
So your biologic clock should predict that you live to 120. The question is, what are you going to do wrong that holds you back? Yes. It might be related to mental health issues and Alzheimer's, which is the most feared of the ailments I talk about, but a lot of our lifestyle choices that drive heart disease, cancer, autoimmune problems, and all the chronic illnesses that hold us back from living the most vital life we can. But the wisdom is still there. You should be able to get to age 120, and we see better and better tools to get us there. Some are lifestyle, some are medications and supplements and ideas that are on the cutting edge, and I see this data more and more. So I'm optimistic that between those preventive approaches and some of the stem cell and genetic manipulations that will become available, that we're going to be able to prevent a lot of the ailments that cull the population, that take out the people who could have otherwise survived. The question is, can we afford what we're talking about? When people live longer, they do develop more chronic illnesses, but many of them are not expensive to treat as long as they're things like high cholesterol, right? Not difficult to manage. But the real issue is stem cell therapy for things like cancer. Because I can take your immune cells out of you. I can teach them to attack your cancer. Because listen, we all have cancer right now. All of us. Anyone who's listening to us and watching us has cancer. But our immune cells, thankfully, most of the time will see the cancer and kill it. What happens when the cancer hides It uses a technique that it has picked up to slip away. And if I can turn your immune system on to kill the cancer, you no longer will die from it. Or maybe you'll get it, but it'll just be a chronic issue for you. But that does become expensive. And I believe we have the opportunity to make these therapies much, much less expensive. And the beauty is that the best medicine is high-quality medicine, and the most expensive medicine is bad medicine. So one of the beautiful things about modern health is as we get wiser in the interventions we offer, they also become more timely, and that makes them less expensive. There's a saying in Turkish, and my strange name, Mehmet Oz, is a Turkish name, but it takes one fool to throw a coin down a well, but it takes 99 wise men to pull it back up again. That's often what we do in medicine. We use high-dose chemotherapy, difficult operations for people who have bad problems, instead of looking at the root problem that led to the issue. When we can target those therapies more accurately, we'll get better results, and it won't cost us as much either, which is why I'm optimistic about the longevity of our population.
It doesn't cost as much as it used to be, but it's still extremely expensive for people, particularly from emerging and developing countries. So here is the issue, if we're talking about one of those ethical issues, that is fairness. The fairness, why would someone get the treatment and the preventive measures that would help them to have much longer life than the others? And if they do, what would happen? So these are all ethical questions that we have to think about before it happens.
If you don't expose people to the truth of how much they're spending on health care, and you say, what percentage of what you make would you spend to be healthy? The average person around the world will say 20%. I'll spend 20 cents of every dollar I make on being healthier. Right now in the world, we don't spend anything close to that. In most countries, it's single digits, under 10%. So I don't want to double the percentage of our gross national product we spend on health, but we can spend more than 8% on it. In the United States, we already spend 15–16%. So we don't have
That's already a lot, you know, by
compared
compared to the other countries.
But we waste at least a third of it. At least a third.
It depends on where you put the money.
Yeah. So if we spend the money in the right place, and we spend 10, 12, 14% of what we spend to be healthier, and some of that goes into better food as well, why not? It's similar to energy. You can spend money on oil, you can spend it on renewables. The renewables cost more today, but they won't forever. But one gives you a long-term game plan, the other one doesn't. The bigger issue as well is if you train women, which is the big opportunity where I see change, women who are educated, have less children, live longer, and they're the key family officer. They're the one I speak to. They're the ones that go out there and they spread the word, and they're very powerful, and people don't respect it.
And they get things done.
Always. In fact, my show, crazily, is probably the top show for political advertising in America, even though I don't ever talk about politics, because my viewers are women, wise, thoughtful women, and no one talks to them and empowers them to be active. Yeah. So I look around me here in this beautiful studio of yours overlooking Beijing, and all the women that are in these little homes around us are making critical, vital decisions for the wealth and health of their family. Why not empower them, give them the tools they need to make sure that they're the glue that holds everyone healthier?
How could that be possible? I mean, this guy has to travel to more than 100 countries around the world because his show is being shown over there. And he has to be appearing on TV all the time and look fresh and absolutely intelligent, that's coming from the real essence, and be able to keep up with all the latest development of scientific research. Well, at the same time, he's a heart surgeon. He's working in Columbia University and now also a member of the Advisory Council on Health for the President. So how could you balance all of the things? I think this would be a very interesting analysis that we do about you that would help the others.
It sounds like an intervention on this. You know, I think the most important message I'd ever give anybody about my life is it's not about time management. It's about energy management.
Tell me more about that.
If the things you do give you chi, give you that life force that's spoken of so often in this beautiful country, then you'll do more of it. So if I do things like when I operate, which I do once a week, or when I make the show, you know, getting ready for the show, it can be difficult. You have to I have to study notes, you know, get makeup. The hardest thing I do is makeup, which I'm not used to. But when I actually make the show, I never feel tired. It's exciting to me. It's enjoyable. It gives me energy. And as long as the things I'm doing in my life are giving me a sense of purpose and life force, I want to keep doing them. I never really feel tired. And I think that's probably the big takeaway for anybody who's busy. They've found a way of taking more of their life in the things that give them energy and less of the hard work that takes and saps the energy. I feel more troubled by people doing jobs they don't love doing, because every day is a job, and then that's not fun to live.
Our exclusive interview with Dr. Oz. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world.